So how do we get them all withdrawn and brought back at this time?
Yeah. Couple, down storms and lights
Okay.
and stuff, nothing major.
That would be,
Driving through yesterday.
I'm fine.
okay.
We got through. I knew you were gonna be major disaster.
What else are you gonna do? Since I have you here trapped.
It's like our area, you know? You design pretty well.
Was where?
Sure, right.
Oh, yeah, it's not.
You don't wanna be the architect, I get it. You don't wanna be the architect.
No, since we came here with
Steven
anything,
and I.
that's right.
Listen, as you know, I know. Proposing is easy.
Josh was in contact with him until I
Proposing is
guess
hard,
late
poking holes is easy.
the process. So he had something, another obligation.
The one that ever with the giant road that went into the fifth green.
How about one where we just flew over? So those yard sales, are those gonna get moving?
Yeah, I'm trying to move a whole bunch of them in May though, 'cause I'm going away for 2 weeks.
Oh, hi, Kara.
You saved you
Make Eleanor do it.
I know, I gotta get on the thing, but
Can you check and see if the two that I care about are in that file?
We could put you in.
And then you saw my email about the Loran.
No. Question.
yes, just today.
Just today, yeah.
Yeah, that sounded like a volunteer. That was a really good idea.
Remind me
that
of
you
what
had.
it said.
Basically, the town doesn't object to the Siasconset Trust getting that land as long as it gets the wastewater treatment facility and, and the police station, but also we're trying to figure out if we need to work something into the language, into the special legislation to make that happen, or if it's already done.
It's not done.
Okay, no, but does it need anything, or does it just need the process to happen? Like, does the legislation need to account for it?
We it? All right, welcome, everybody. It's a little bit after 5, and just sort of to get things started, I think people have been interested in sort of a free-flowing opportunity for some Q&A and commentary on the Siasconset Beach Preservation Fund project on Baxter Road, and that's what this is intended to be. We've got representatives of the town, Siasconset Beach, contractor, we've got
Construction
Jeff,
manager.
excuse me, the construction manager, correct me when I get there. We've got Kara from our Department of Public Works and Jeff from the Natural Resources Department and Town Manager Libby Gibson. We've got Steve Cohen, Counsel for SBPF, and Andrew Vorse, our Planning Director. All have sort of different spheres of influence and, I think, responsibilities to manage the project. There's all kinds of written documentation on our own town website in a couple places, one where the Conservation Commission posts lots of information, and the Board of Selectmen on our page, we post lots of information. So, to the extent you're interested in anything more than you have a chance to ask about today, we direct you there for, original document review, and you'll find it's helpful. And sometimes your questions and queries can come from reviewing those documents. And what about page 3 of the MOU, paragraph 6, or whatever might be on your mind, because there isn't often the opportunity at a Board of Selectmen meeting, or certainly at a Conservation Commission session, to ask those in a form that's not quite so, sometimes inhibiting or seeming to be restrictive. And this is not meant to be that. This is meant to be much more open and free-flowing. So that's sort of my introduction to this. And I don't know, maybe we ought to, a couple ways to start. We could ask people up here to make a comment, or we could go right to a Q&A, and that might be as good a way to get started. I have some of my own questions. Mr. Fee might have some of his questions. He is a board member who's here with us as well. Matt indicated he has to leave in about a half an hour, so if you want to get to Mr. Fee, you want to get him early on and don't let him escape, okay? So there we go. I'll start with one, and then maybe that helps open it up. I note in some of the documents that the folks who signed the license agreement with the town were all supposed to enter into one big beach easement agreements. They may have. I don't know where that stands. I think that's an important element in a requirement the town made. And so I'll start with a question on that and where those stand. And either a town party can answer and/or a Siasconset Beach representative.
Steve, are you working on that?
Sure. I don't represent all of the landowners. I only represent SBPF. Let me just say, in my personal capacity, I think that those big beach easements are really great, and I encourage my clients to do them because they provide good liability protection and they open up beach that people generally use anyway. There's almost no reason not to do them. They're a win-win. That said, I don't believe that process has been started. I think that is something that should be engaged in soon, but it wasn't part of
And
what's
just
happened so far.
everybody understands, SBPF is not a property owner.
That's right.
And they could not sign such agreements themselves anyway. So one of the reasons I think a forum such as this is helpful is to let the public and the rest of us know whose responsibility is it to make sure those agreements are followed up on and entered into. And I think from my point of view as a member of the board and a member of the public, I'm interested in knowing where responsibility lies, who accepts that, because otherwise, it's highly probable nothing will happen.
Yeah.
And I'll say that just so everybody understands in the context of the, Steve knows this, the license agreement itself and the escrow account. Those documents were not completed before construction started. I'm used to closing, in my former life, loan agreements. And you come to the table and you have 47 documents or 3 documents, all of which have to be executed before money passes. In this case, it's like a building permit in my mind. All the documents should be executed before construction starts. Frankly, that didn't happen. And so, okay, but we need to get on and make sure appropriate documentation is entered into. So that's sort of my opening question and comment for the panelists.
Just usually on that process, the Plus Department takes the lead on proposing a draft one big beach easement. There are 2 or 3, sort of generally accepted versions that are out there, but those are negotiated privately with the landowners.
Right, as part of the license agreement, I believe to move 2 of the structures, there's a requirement within a certain period of time that the one big beach easements go on record. So we're still in that time frame. I know the highest publicity one was the DeAngelis, and right now a plan is being finalized on that. So we're still in the process, at least on those, on filing those. So.
Yeah, I would just add that I think it really is town administration's responsibility to ensure that the associated required documents are being followed up on and recorded in a timely manner. And we did not do that with the escrow and the other document that Mr. Atherton mentioned. That's our fault. We should have done that, and we'll make sure that that does not fall through the cracks going forward.
Yeah, just in terms of the escrow, the money is sitting in the account at my office, and town council's office is drafting an agreement that we would expect to enter into fairly quickly. Those documents are fairly standard.
Yeah, and just to be open here, I've said this before, and I'll say it again for everybody. I've never come across a situation in all my years involved with this situation where Wisconsin Beach folks didn't comply, okay? There's some timely issues. Wherever there was money involved, they've always met their responsibilities. So I appreciate this.
Yeah.
Is there somebody else with a question? If you could come to the mic so that we can hear it over the air.
Yes, my name is Deanne Atherton, and just speaking as a one of the coordinators for the Nantucket Coastal Conservancy, I'd like to thank you for following through on your offer of hosting a second public information and Q&A session, and for trying to schedule it. And I also thank the representatives for SBPF for being here. I know maybe there was some reluctance to do so, but you're here and we appreciate it. I would like to just reference, I have just 3 quick questions, and I'd like to reference the underlying document, which is the memorandum of Understanding, which is really laying out the blueprint for everything that we're doing. And I noticed that part of phase one, the Memorandum of Understanding, as I think of it, is a public-private partnership. And a partnership seems to me that one side gets something and the other side gets something. So as a citizen and someone who's keenly interested in this, I'm very aware of trying to think through of what the town is to get, what the citizens are to get in this agreement. And I have 3 questions about that. In phase one of the project, it says here in the Memorandum of Understanding that SBPF has proposed in phase one the construction of a coastal erosion structure, in this case a rock revetment, which we know has been changed to a geotextile installation, and reinstallation of the bluff walk for a distance of approximately 1,500 linear feet located between approximately 75 and 119 Baxter Road. All of the meetings I've gone to, everything I've read, I have seen no movement forward in the reinstallation of the bluff walk, which is part of phase one, according to the terms of this agreement. So if you could give us an update on that, I'd appreciate it.
Yeah, I'd be happy to. You actually said 3 or 4 things I'd like to respond to. First of all, there was no reluctance to participate. We're happy, SBPF is happy to answer anyone's questions at any time. And we think that more information on this is better. I mean, there are certainly plenty of public forums on it, but there's no reluctance to participate. Secondly, I just want to clarify one factual assertion in your question, which is that the revetment has been changed to a geotube, and that's not actually true. What happened is that there was a application for about a 4,000-foot long revetment project, and that has been put on hold because it was determined that there was not sufficient time before the 2014 storm season to install any sort of revetment, and so there was an application for a temporary geotube project at a much smaller length, and that is what was approved. That was not approved as filed as a notice of intent, but a smaller version, instead of 1,500 feet down to 900 feet, was approved through the emergency certification project. So the geotube has not replaced the revetment. The geotube is a parallel issue with the revetment. But in terms of rebuilding or reinstating the bluff walk, that has always been and was talked very heavily about during the rock revetment hearings at the Conservation Commission. We consider that, or SBPF considers that, to be one of the great benefits of the revetment. Is that it is something that you could traverse across on itself, and secondly, that the protection of the toe of the bluff allows for portions of the Siasconset of the bluff walk that are there to be protected, and portions that have been eroded to be reinstated. We haven't gotten to putting anything that was destroyed back because we haven't had any protection of the bluff yet. I mean, the geotube system is only brand new, and it's not there hasn't been time to do that. We're still really getting through the permitting process for what's there now.
Steve.
Yeah.
Point of clarification.
Sure.
Public access across the rock revetment is not, at least in my definition, reinstallation of the bluff walk. The bluff walk is along the edge of the bluff, as we all know. We know north of 65 it is eroded away. It says here SBPF will construct, I turned the page.
Yeah. No,
we're talking public access across a hard armoring structure on the beach, in my opinion, is not the same thing as the bluff walk.
Yeah,
now, this is something SBPF promised, and it's not been forthcoming.
Well, I would really disagree with this characterization of it not being forthcoming, but I do agree with your point that access across the revetment is not the same as the bluff walk. Reinstallation of portions of the bluff walk where it is physically possible, because it's not actually physically possible in certain places. It would be either too dangerous or there's no space for it in certain locations. And I believe that we submitted a plan a year ago that shows where you could go along the bluff and where you might have to go back out, or it's just not physically possible to go the whole way to the lighthouse like we used to. But public access along the beach and public access in general is an important part of this plan, and it is an important part of the criteria that are in the Wetlands Protection Act and the local bylaws, and that's why that issue has consistently been addressed. But I guess what I'm confused about is you seem to be suggesting that we haven't done something that's part of a permit that hasn't been approved. So the reason why
Excuse me, Steve, I'm simply referring to the memorandum of understanding.
Right.
That SBPF will have a reinstallation of the bluff walk in phase 1 for a distance of approximately 1,500 linear feet located between 75 and 119 Baxter Road. I'm not going to argue with you on this. I'm just saying, as one citizen, and I'm sure other citizens, this was part of the quid pro quo in the memorandum of understanding, and I haven't seen it. So if you can move forward with that, we really appreciate it. My second point, okay, is that, I'm sorry, but we have to go quickly. We only have an hour, and we have people who have a lot of questions. The second thing from the memorandum of understanding is a statement in here: SBPF agrees to commence immediately and to diligently pursue obtaining the consents and waivers as set forth in the paragraph above for alternative access. I'd like to know, I know that Plus is negotiating with property owners in Northern Baxter Road. I'd like to know what role SBPF is playing consistent with the provision of the MOU.
What I can tell you is that there are hundreds, if not thousands, of man-hours involved in trying to come up with a plan that is workable. The engineering and the personal property rights and the politics and the zoning and the environmental issues involved are extremely complicated. There have been, dozens of plans that have been proposed, that have been worked on. There's a big meeting about it tomorrow. I mean, that issue is getting a lot of attention. SBPF is a participant in it. There are many homeowners that are involved. The town is involved. I don't know that it could be getting any more attention than it is.
All right, and SBPF is playing an active role in that.
Absolutely.
All right, thank you. And then my third reference to the memorandum of understanding is that we're talking about providing stabilization for the tow in a way that will not result in additional coastal erosion or other environmental damage as may be determined by the town's consultant, the Conservation, and/or the Department of Environmental Protection. Our Conservation Commission, through months of hearing, has taken 3 votes indicating their unwillingness to permit a geotextile installation. And still, as recently as last week, you both came in asking for an enhancement of the existing geotextile installation. It just seems to me, by reading this provision in the MOU, that you agreed right up front to do something that was permittable by the Conservation Commission. And they vote not once, they vote twice, they vote 3 times. And we continue to present something to them that they are reluctant to permit. And I don't see how that's consistent with the memorandum of understanding.
Well, I don't think that's factually accurate. There has never been a vote that denied the geotubes. There was an emergency certification in which they failed. The NOI for the geotubes has never had a vote, so that's pending. The first emergency certification, they declined to determine that there was an emergency, and also declined to approve the geotubes, but that wasn't the only issue. The other votes in favor of alternative systems are not necessarily a vote to turn down something else. So you might want to characterize them that way, and we don't need to really debate it, but the system that is currently before the Concom is currently before the Concom, and if they approve it, then they approve it, and if they approve something else, then they approve something else, and if they decline it, then they decline it. But again, I think you're just, because that hasn't happened yet doesn't mean it won't.
Well, I think you're defining it. I mean, there was a vote taken within the NOI that a majority of the commission felt there was a preferable alternative to geotextile tubes. And in fact, I remember that the chairman of the Concom asked Kara to be creative and to come back with a proposal, and the hybrid came back. And they have indicated, not only in comment, but in votes, that they would favor or would permit a hybrid installation, and yet you do not come in with a hybrid installation. So I don't understand how that's consistent with this term in the MOU.
Well, we did, as, excuse me, as you said, I was getting creative, making the, excuse me, proposal for the hybrid. But when the engineers took a look at it, they said that it was not suitably protective. So when our consultant looked at it, at the 3 geotubes, she said, well, that's going to be more protective than the 2 geotubes with the jute and core on top. And we actually are going back to the commission at their next meeting to try to meet a consensus, something that they can approve. So it is very much a work in progress. It's not by any means a fait accompli.
Well, I would hope that, you know, that we, the town, would listen to our Conservation Commission, because it doesn't say that we'll propose something that our engineers approve of.
Right.
It says something that is permittable by the Concom and is consistent with the Concom. And they have indicated to us a number of times they're not in favor of an all geotextile installation. Thank you for the clarification.
Bam?
Hi, Bam Lafarge. I have 3 questions, or 3 things to say. One is that in terms of liability, right now, the 2 delivery areas along the bluff have no fencing or anything, and I'm wondering whether if somebody drives off the end, what liability the town or anybody else has. That's one question. I'm going to ask these 3 questions. The other thing is, as you probably know, and I was down there this morning on the beach, 2 of the geotubes have been exposed by a storm. And I'm wondering what's going to be done and when about that, what the plan is. The third thing is that right now you have a situation where there's something happened. There was an event. In my opinion, it was not a big storm. It didn't blow from the east for 3 days or anything. It went around to the north. It seemed like a big storm, but it actually took a lot of sand away. So my question there, and this is actually what I'm most interested in, is it seems to me that from anyone's point of view that some engineering should be done to determine what got taken. Where's the beach profile now? How did it change in the storm? And what does it look like now as a sort of snapshot in time? Thank you.
I just wanted to say, from somebody that had to clear the roads, it was a big storm. But I'm going to let Jamie talk about the beach.
Sure. I'll defer the first part of the question to Stephen, but as far as regarding the liability of the 2 lots, but in regards to the,
It's on.
Turn it off.
is that better?
Nope, it's off.
I think you got
That
to
better?
talk
Just
louder.
be closer.
All right. I'll defer the liability question, the first question, to Stephen. In regards to the 2 geotubes that are exposed on the beach, that's true. I was down there yesterday and then again this morning. So right now it's really the northern half of the second tier is, I think, what's exposed.
Yeah,
Yes.
the lower one is probably going to get covered up by the beach.
It's already
Yeah.
recovered.
Yeah,
So
that's
that one is pretty much
Yeah.
covered up entirely.
Yes, it probably.
You could tell the beach profile must have been down to probably, my guess, elevation 6 or elevation 5 yesterday.
The
because
top of the tube were a little bit below it.
The
lower
top
one,
of the
yeah.
bottom tube is
Right.
around elevation 7.5 mean low water, so, and I know that was, I could see from the top that it was exposed at the northern end. But anyway, the lower tier has been covered naturally by the beach recovering in the 24 hours after the storm. And the second tube that's now exposed as a result of the template in front of it, the sand cover in front of it doing what it was supposed to do, getting contributed toward the littoral system as part of the storm event, is something that we will go cover up, and I'm assuming in the next week. Fortunately, we're going to be at Concom next Wednesday, and speaking to Jeff, we're going to add this to our agenda item. One of us will arrange a letter to you guys tomorrow, because the NOI isn't worked out at this point. under the emergency certification, it's my understanding, Jeff can probably speak better to it, that we would be able to continue to do the nourishment. And assuming that is the case, we are entirely interested in doing that and performing on that. So as soon as we get the green light by these guys that we can get out there and re-nourish and cover up the system, we will do that. Hopefully in the next week.
So I'll add into that a little bit, just for a little bit of clarity. The conditions that came from the DEP and then were reaffirmed by the local conservation commission as part of the 3 geotube design that was approved by the emergency certification. Part of those conditions included a nourishment and mitigation requirement for sand, and that sand cover has to be maintained and to meet certain volumes at certain points of the year. So under those provisions, the town in Siasconset Beach are obligated to maintain a sand cover of a certain amount, and then also provide the nourishment schedule that's provided in those conditions. So at this point, I think notice to the commission to satisfy that condition and then performing that maintenance nourishment would fall within those conditions as they currently exist.
How would you know that you've put, how much sand has been taken away and what ought to get put back?
I agree with Jamie. That's going to come down to, and as you said, to some actual on the ground surveying and engineering to determine that volume that's left, to redo some of the profiles that are in that area specifically and determine that volume, and then to replace that volume. That's all part of the, at least as I see it, that's all part of the renourishment and maintenance of that structure, is the monitoring that goes with that, so you know you're not putting down more than supposed to be there, or more importantly, not putting down too little.
I can elaborate on that a little bit
Sure.
if you want. Again, depending on how things flush out with Jeff and the Conservation Commission on Wednesday, we would do the geometry, we would understand how much we lost in the storm event, and that would be a minimum. But as I understand what's being proposed in the NOI for nourishment going forward, is that there would be a spring nourishment in April and then another one in November. So I'm not sure that if you're gonna run the trucks out there, it makes a lot of sense to do, let's say, for example, the geometry says we lost 3 cubic yards per lineal foot as part of the storm event. We may wanna put 5, 6, or 7 out there so that you have some on top of the system that's available to be pushed down without bringing trucks back out between now and November. So it's something that we'll talk to them about. I suspect that we would want to bring more sand out there now than was lost in the storm event.
Yeah, the details in which that would be done are not part of the emergency certification, but they are part of the pending notice of intent, and we would expect the notice of intent that's issued would have requirements for certain amounts of sand to be provided at certain times in certain ways, and that in fact, based on the discussions that were had during the marine mattress project, that failure to do that would be a failure that could trigger removal. So that's one incentive to make sure it's done, and then also that because the geotextile tubes are UV sensitive,
That was
Yeah.
some of my concern. Is not the sort of, even what's happening with the Concom, just practically covering them up again
Right.
and keeping them covered, which it seems, I mean, I don't know how long it takes them to degrade, but you know, the morning sun is hitting it every morning.
That's
you
right.
know?
It's in SBPF's interest to protect its
Right.
investment by keeping it covered, because if it's not covered, it's getting beat up by the UV rays. So we anticipate that there would be both the monetary and the erosion protection and the Conservation Commission levels of keeping it, of requiring it, keeping it covered.
Now, what is this white thing that's flapping around down there?
On the northern end,
Yeah.
that's part of the scour apron. So there's a scour apron that basically goes, the one that you're seeing there is the one that comes around the bottom of the lowest tier, comes around the back of that tube, and comes over the top of it. And then the second tube is stacked, terraced on top of that tube, and you end up with a flap, essentially, right here.
What does that do? I don't understand that it's really doing anything, you know? I don't understand, you know, what.
Well, it's anchoring the anchor tube that's out in front of the lowest tube. So the lowest tube has the scour apron, comes along, and then about 5 feet out in front of it, it's got call it a 3-foot circumference anchor
Right.
tube. And the idea there is, in a huge storm event, if the beach, if the profile of the beach got lower beyond 0, which is the bottom elevation of the bottom tier, that anchor tube would engage the scour mat and essentially imitate a lower tube. And so by bringing that scour apron up around the back and pinching it between the second and third terrace, you're anchoring the scour apron, which is attached to the anchor tube.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
And Bam, on your liability question, you know, that's a very.
It's a fence question, really. It's like, I don't want somebody who's had too much to drink, even if they're illegally on the road, to go over the edge not seeing anything, you
Yeah.
know? It's not really even a liability thing, it's more like a practical thing to keep somebody from hurting themselves with a fence or with something.
Those are private properties, so it's a good point, and I think as we figure out exactly how we're going to deal with these, this next delivery, and then getting the sites prepped for the summertime aesthetically, we should incorporate that into our questions that we're going
Because
to
you
be dealing
guys
with.
had a fence there when the construction was going on in many areas, and now it's just wide open. You could just literally drive over the edge.
So we had a fence on the backside, so that was two things. That was a construction fence, and it was also fortunately able to be like a debris fence. But I think that if we're gonna have a fence, because these are private properties, it should be on the landward side of the property as opposed to the top of, because it's like, where do you put it? And where
Right,
is safe?
no, well, I'm just sort of asking for information and just thinking that there ought to be something. I mean, you have that, what's that lane there?
The private way between 85 and 87.
Yeah, that's blocked off, and I've always worried about that in the past, somebody going out and driving off it when there were houses along here, but that has things blocking it, but then you can just drive off the edge anywhere.
I think a split rail fence is a good idea.
Yeah,
And we should
I
figure that
I
out.
think it is something that we need to take a
I
look
mean,
at.
there's some that you ought
We
to think
definitely
about.
will.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Matt,
Thank
did you want to say something before you had to go? Okay. Go ahead, Bruce.
Bruce Perry. I want to continue some of Bam's questions that I had to, in light of the emergency permits which required the town SBPF to file a notice of intent to get permission to allow the project, the 900-foot project, to stay. Has that been filed yet? Or what's the status?
What the commission has, what we asked for and what the commission has agreed to is to use the joint application that we made in October with the town and SBPF, and that is the notice of intent that's being filed for the emergency permit.
So that's for the 1,400 feet?
Originally, it was for 1,400,
Yeah.
it's 900 now.
900, okay. And secondly, in light of the enforcement order issued by the Concom that asked the project to cease and desist from any activity until it comes in compliance, I would think that would also include dumping more sand over the bluff until you are in compliance with the existing permit, and how is that being addressed?
Well, the emergency permit that DEP required
Yep.
includes the maintenance of the template. And what Jamie was talking about is going to the commission and ensuring that, in fact, in reference to the emergency permit, that we can go ahead and renourish.
I understand that, but the local conservation commission issued the enforcement order, said that you were out of compliance with that permit.
Right.
And
The enforcement
to-
order was wrapped into the notice of intent. So for all intents and purposes, it's now part of the notice of intent.
but still, you can't do work until it's approved by the commission, I
I
guess.
can answer this. I think the purpose of them coming in front of the commission next week to discuss the placement of the nourishment sand is to specifically get a release to do that specific work and to also clear up any outstanding issues of enforcement that are still around, like the pipe or
Okay.
some of the other sand that was placed. I think that's to be discussed even outside of the notice of intent process to allow that specific work to take place and be approved by the commission.
So then we would expect no work to occur till after Wednesday's meeting?
Outside of regular monitoring and engineering,
Yes,
I would say yes.
okay.
I don't think surveying or engineering counts as work. I think that's all investigation and data collection.
I know that I'm interested to see the profiles pre-storm and post-storm because all the other projects out there have required that type of information to see how much sand is lost and how the beach recovers. And I guess my other comment would be that it seems to be taking a long time for SBPF to get permission to install something out there. I mean, it's been going for almost a year. And I want to know, when is the end product? When are we going to come to a final design that's going to be submitted to the Concom to get approved, instead of keep changing it every month?
I know from the town standpoint,
Yep.
you know, we weren't involved with the other notice of intent for the revetment. We've only been involved with this particular one. And what we originally proposed was the 4 geotubes,
Right.
and the commission indicated in an informal vote that that was not what they wanted to move forward with. So the changes that have been made are basically to try to work with the commission and create a project that is something that they can support.
The-
So it has taken a while.
Yeah, there's a hearing on April 2nd that I think we
Yeah.
would make I'm hoping we'll make substantial headway on exactly that issue, which is what Kara was referring to and before, to Deanne's question about the same issue.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions? Go ahead.
Ashley Ersman. I guess I have a question, a little bit for Jeff and a little bit for SBPF about your submission to Concom for next week. I know they'd asked for a better as-built, because the as-built that has been submitted repeated times isn't necessarily what's there. And I'm wondering if you guys sent someone out to get more information on that before the storm, or if we're gonna get like a new perspective after the storm, like if anything had been done there. And then I'm also wondering, this is for Jeff, if the commission has gone on to hire a private consultant to look into some of these matters.
Sure, I can. I know we've looked at it a little bit, and I know I've kind of put together kind of a scope of services document for the commission to look at, if that's the avenue they choose to go down. So that can be ready and prepared kind of at their, I know it came up at the last meeting, so we'll have that ready for them if they wish to continue to pursue that. As far as the as-built and information that's there, I know we haven't received anything new to the office as of yet. I will assure everyone, as soon as we get it, it will be up, and this is also a chance not to get a cheap plug-in, but everyone that's here also needs to keep in mind, when you're looking for information, tomorrow is the first day that the new town website is going to be out. So please, if you can't find the information, please call or contact the office, and we'll be sure that you're directed to the right webpage to get that information, because it's going to be changing. So the other one won't be updated and the other one will be. So please call if you can't find it. We'll try to get the word out and post it as best we can. But I don't know if you guys want to answer the survey question.
I don't know whether,
Well, there are, at that hearing, you know, we made a list of everything that was asked for. And one of the reasons why this project continues on indefinitely is that every time we go to a hearing and we present new information, there are new questions or new requests for information. So there are, you know, there are 14 or 15 things on the deliverables list that we have for the next meeting. And I'll tell you right now that there's not all of those things could physically be done for tomorrow and will not be addressed on April 2nd. Some of them will have to wait at least till the following meeting, because they're fairly intensive issues. One of those is the survey data information. And then there are two kinds of information that we're asked for. The first is information that the Concom might want in order to issue its approval. And the second one is information that the Concom might want in terms of setting baselines and for its monitoring and those kind of things. SBPF is going to comply with those requests, but probably at different times in different ways, because some of them are something where you would send a surveyor out to do it, and other ones might require a LiDAR flyover, like getting a new profile of the entire top of the bluff is not something a surveyor would do. You do that with an airplane. I mean, in conjunction with a surveyor, but it's not sending two guys and a laser out there. The template itself, the template is the sand that covers the geotubes. That is not a static situation. It changes with the waves. It changes with the wind. We don't anticipate that would be
Right.
considered a static object, and that it will be addressed in the order of conditions that's issued as to what the minimum coverage level is, what the minimum angle is, and those kind of things, and it will constantly be in flux.
Okay, so like as far as having like a true methodology, this is how it was done, because again, I'm looking at the old as-built, and the scour aprons were just described as going over the geotube, and that's what we can see flapping. And in this as-built, it doesn't show them going back over the geotubes, it just shows them going around the back. So I guess that's where I'm wondering, like, if this is to be replicated, or it's an experiment, like, who's actually recording this stuff, and where is that? Just because I don't think we're getting the correct information. So,
The scour apron is handled through engineering details that are submitted as part of the application, and I don't know that that level of detail is in the as-built. The as-built is just sort of showing where everything is. But again, if there's information that the commission wants, it's going to get it. That the Conservation Commission wants, it's going to get it. There's nothing inaccurate about the as-built that was submitted, but there have been requests for additional supplements of it, and those are being worked on. But I don't think there's any suggestion that what's in there is false.
Yeah, the as-built shows exactly where the geotubes are, and that's the one piece of static
right, I guess
information.
false wouldn't be what I'm saying, incomplete
Yeah.
is how I see it. And I guess in a few different meetings, I personally, and I'm not a member of the commission, I'm not an engineer, I haven't seen much progress in that sort of thing. So that's just what I'm wondering, if anyone has kind of been out there, but it sounds like not before this storm.
Not before the storm, but we don't anticipate that the geotubes themselves have been moved. I mean, they're barely exposed. But to the extent there's a static object that the commission wants additional location points of, that's something we can provide. To the extent that the commission wants information about the height and width and angle and depth of the template, that's something that can be provided. To the extent that the commission wants information about the bluff, as it might have changed since the last time it was done, that's something that can be provided. But that's something that we are working with the commission on, to provide the right information at the right time. But it's fairly substantial undertaking.
I can imagine. All right, thank you.
Any other questions? Charlie?
Charlie Walters. I'm not clear on some of the details about how the sand is being used in the project. If I understand this correctly, the sand is trucked in first, and then somehow it ends up down at the toe of the bluff. Is there a belt of some sort, or does it just get dumped, or both of those things, or?
Yeah, there's a delivery conveyor. The
Okay.
truck dumps it on the ground. The loader picks it up, dumps it into the hopper, and then there's a conveyor belt that takes it out over the end of the bluff, and it falls off the conveyor to the bottom.
Okay. Not all of that gets to the bottom right away, correct? Because if you see photographs, there's a lot of sand, not at the toe, but it's on the
Yeah,
the
it depends
face of
on
the
how
bluff.
far out the conveyor belt can be set, and
Okay.
how close the hopper can get to the edge of the bluff.
Okay, and in a few spots, it's actually on top of the bluff. Not a huge amount, but there is some sand on top of the bluff spilling over onto the face. I've seen this in photographs.
Yeah, that may be sand that didn't make it into the hopper and fell to the top of the bluff.
Well, I think I've actually seen the same photo that you're referring to, and there was a particular day, I think at 87, where that was, where I witnessed that personally. And so what happens is, when you have essentially a cone-shaped delivery volume of sand, it did mound up almost to the bottom of the conveyor belt itself, and then as the sand gets sloughed off, or is taken from the bottom by the equipment that's spreading it, that pile would settle down, and so, if you go out there now, there's no, there's no sand.
Okay.
That was just part of the delivery process, and was a temporary condition, like temporary within 24 hours.
Okay.
It just meant the machinery at the bottom hadn't taken the sand from the bottom and pushed it out so that it would, slough down.
Okay, that's my next question. The sand that's on the face, most of the face or most of the vertical length of the face. That gets from the face to the tubes by some kind of heavy equipment. Here's my first question then. Whether you like this project or not, when the heavy equipment takes that sand that's still on the face of the bluff, these are not precision instruments we're dealing with. How do you know you aren't taking part of the bluff as well?
Yeah,
And if you're not taking part of the bluff, aren't you wasting sand that's still on the face of the bluff?
the sand that's on the face of the bluff, meaning between the top of the bluff and the template, is not intended to be pushed down by heavy equipment. That's sand that was put on the face of the bluff to augment that bluff. The sand that was sent over by the conveyor belt as part of the project is in the location where it's intended to stay until erosion or wind or rain takes it down. In the future, sand will be put over the edge and will go down ABS pipes that will be on these big X stands, so that it doesn't have to be on the, it won't interfere with the, it won't use the face of the bluff as a slide essentially anymore. That because that's going to be planted. So that is not a waiting zone for heavy equipment to come in and take it off the side of the face.
Well, I have seen video of equipment doing precisely that.
Let me clarify that a little bit. So when Stephen just referred to the ADS pipes, that's if we get permission in the future to vegetate the front of it, and that's something we've talked about in the Concom hearings as part of the rest of the NOI. As it relates to the delivery system now, the conveyor shoots the sand over the face of the bluff. You end up with basically a cone, and so you go with what was a concave bluff face to more of a convex bluff face, but by the position of the excavator at the bottom on the template, you know exactly where the original bluff face is relative to that piece of equipment. And so when you're pulling the bottom of that comb and watching the loose sand slough down from the top, it just kind of continually feeds it. But they're not, I was out there pretty much the whole time. I never witnessed them get into the face of the bluff, and that's something we were very, very careful about.
And there's a space behind the geotube and the bluff that as the gravity pulls the sand down, gets filled with augmentation sand. So to get into the bluff, they actually have to go across an open space to get to it.
That makes sense to me. But you're saying that all that sand, gravity will take it down?
Eventually. So,
What's eventually?
when
It seems that you're spending an awful lot of money on sand that is still sitting on the face of the bluff. That's what I don't understand.
Well, I don't know exactly what the angle of repose is, but it's around 39, 40 degrees. And so that's when you get to that angle, it starts to stabilize. If you get it beyond that angle, it's going to run down to the bottom, or it's going to push the toe out. And so as the toe crept out onto what we call the sand template, the flat part on top of the third tier, that is the sand volume that we were pulling from with the heavy equipment and then dispersing throughout the.
Okay, thanks for straightening that part out. That makes sense to me. But when you say eventually, two things. It's, again, whether you like the project or not, to me that spoils the aesthetic appeal of that bluff. You've got these cones of a different colored sand up against a bluff that's been there for who knows how long. I think it spoils the appearance of the beach. And whether eventually is 6 months or 10 years or something in between, why didn't you use a longer conveyor belt in the beginning so that all the sand ended up at the toe of the bluff instead of being spilled and making you wait until gravity brought it down?
That's not the intent. The intent is not to leave it like that. First of all, I guess if you go out.
No, I understand that, but why wasn't the longer belt used so that this question wouldn't have come up?
So that there would be no sand on the face of the bluff above
I know you're dealing
template.
with an angle. I appreciate that, but isn't there a longer belt that could have gotten all that sand directly to the toe of the bluff from the get-go?
Just from a logistical point of view, relative to the delivery of that sand, we wanted to control where that sand landed. And also, you're also dealing with very high winds, often out of the east or northeast during that time. So having it run right off the end of the conveyor and basically slide down the face of the bluff is, you know where it's gonna end up, and it's not gonna get blown back all over the houses in the street, actually, which we witnessed in a couple scenarios, even when we were dropping it 6 feet. So it was a much easier way to control where the sand is gonna go and you know, how much of it's not gonna end up blown all over the surrounding area.
And I think it's a matter of physics, that you've got the weight of the hopper on one end, and there's a certain length of conveyor that's gonna be balanced by that.
You don't want it going over the edge,
Exactly.
obviously.
There's a mid, that's a good point, Kara. So the axis for this thing is right in the middle, so you don't wanna be out in the street either. So we have a 64-foot, you don't want the wheel or the weight of the conveyor to be within 25 feet of the edge of the bluff.
Okay.
And you want the hopper to be, you know, as much out of the roadway as possible. Unfortunately, we were in the roadway a little bit. So we ended up with a 64-foot conveyor is what we could manage.
Which is
Okay.
pretty significant.
Now, Mr. Cohen referenced another way of getting sand down to the bottom at a future point.
Yes.
I'm not clear on why that isn't being used now. You're talking about pipes?
Yes.
Okay, why aren't they using the pipes now, which would, you wouldn't be wasting sand on the side of the bluff, and as Mr. Feely said, you'd be avoiding getting sand blowing all over.
Right. Well, I don't know that having sand on the side of the bluff is a waste. It actually provides several benefits, and I'd be happy to walk through it with you if you want to know what those benefits are. But the conical shape is something that is disappearing as we speak, just because of the wind, and the color is something that will change pretty quickly too, based on just the weather environment and the planting that's planned. But having that sand there provides better inflow of the rain. It provides protection from the organic, from the runoff when you have rivulets, and it helps stabilize the oversteepened portions of the bluff. So having that there relieves a lot of the weight from the most endangered top portions of the bluff. There's several benefits to having that sand there, and whether or not it stays, and whether or not, you know, I guess the answer is the Concom and the Department of Environmental Protection approved doing it this way, and that's the way it was done. And the way it'll be done in the future will most likely be different because it will account for the plantings.
I think a lot of the decisions that were made for the installation was basically because it was an emergency to try to get it in before the season started. And I think it was actually a pretty good learning experience. And if in the future we find that we can do it just as well with the tubes, then, you know, perhaps that would be the choice if there was a future.
So what Mr. Cohen is saying is the tubes are coming after the planting, and that's why they're,
That's right.
you didn't want to use the tubes before then for, I don't know, whatever reason you had. So do I understand you correctly?
Well, assuming that the Concom approves it,
Yes.
that's the plan that's been
Yes.
presented, that in order to do the planting and then protect the plants, that the tubes would work that way.
Okay.
And
And-
Jamie, is that what's done now, the tubes?
No, right now, we're just dropping it over.
No, I
the
mean in
top.
other places.
Not that I'm aware of.
Okay. I meant only from the terraces.
Last question.
No.
No, okay.
Go ahead.
Last question. Did SBPF request permission to have the sand on the face of the bluff and on top when that happened, or did they come to you and say whatever? Did you apply for that, or did they insert that into permission to work on the bluff?
Well, the sand was
It came from you or them, in other words,
when you say you, do you mean?
SBPF
Oh,
and/or the DPW.
okay.
I'm just curious whose idea it was.
Which idea? This.
That it's okay to have the sand pile up on the face of the bluff, and if necessary, at the top of the bluff, rather than trying to get it to go to the toe of the bluff uninterrupted.
Right. Well, I don't think anybody ever thought that shooting the sand 40 feet and trying to that was never, really something that was considered, trying to shoot it 40 feet down the hill and have it land in the right place. But that plan was presented to the Concom and the DEP and approved that way, of having it go on the face of the bluff for the installation.
It's the more
Okay,
typical style of installation, and I think at the point that we were at, the contractor was in question. At first, when we went to the Concom, the slurry mixture was going to be done with water from hydrants, and there were issues with that. And we're actually glad to find out a contractor that was going to mix it with the ocean water. Number one, because there wouldn't be the freshwater impact of the water coming out of the tubes into the ocean, but also the ability not to have to pump it up and then pump it back down again. So it went a lot by what the contractor has had the experience with.
Right.
So
You know, Jeff or Jamie, correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe all other erosion control projects that have been approved by the Concom essentially involve dumping the sand over the top to the extent that it's not accessible from somewhere else. Is that,
I would agree with that for bluffs of that size.
yeah.
A number of the projects in other spots, it's delivered from either the beach
This
or
isn't the
from
first
another
time that
access.
was done.
No, I think all of the other projects, even on that bluff itself, the terraces and the other projects, were all sand delivered essentially by the same means. Thinking about the terraces and some of those other projects, that private way that we discussed between 85 and 87 used to be the traditional dump point for sand nourishment that was there, to the point where a different a geo-reinforcing material was installed within that way to take the weight of the trucks. But that's typical of those projects, is it was delivered there, it gets to the bottom, and then it's moved by machines that are brought on from somewhere else.
and those were dump trucks that just backed up to the edge and dumped.
Correct.
Right. And I'm aware of some projects in Needle Point that have used the dump over the top method. And
Yes, some of those do as well. It's a very delivery method for sites, and as we've seen more and more of these at the Concom, delivery methods for sites are usually, I know it sounds really kind of simple, determined by the site and the geography for the distance to travel. I mean, you obviously don't want to be hauling significant amounts of sand 2 miles down the beach via, dump trucks or other those things. If there's an alternative method, usually the commission is looking for what they believe to be the least amount of impact possible. I don't think that sand delivery can be done without some kind of impact to the site. It's just the nature of the project, the nature of the delivery. It's about finding the one that may be the most appropriate for the time and the situation. I think the commission tries to do that.
Thanks very much.
Any more questions? Hi.
Dirk Van Loo. It seems we're spending a lot of time talking about the delivery of the sand over the edge when, is it not true that the intention is to cover the face of the bluff with sand in order to plant it? Because right now, anyone who's been there knows that there will not be netting and planting over the very rough, very creviced, fissured face of the bluff. And my understanding was that it would be covered in sand to facilitate that netting and that planting. In which case, a discussion of whether or not we pour sand on the bluff is kind of academic.
If the commission allows the planting, there will be a top dressing put so that the plugs of beach grass and other native species have something to hold on to, and then the netting placed.
And
So
the
it will
top
be
dressing
covered.
consists of what?
Just basically giving a smooth surface for the plantings.
Yes, but I understand smooth
Oh,
surface. but what-
sand, I'm sorry.
Sand, yes. And so, as I said, we would be covering the entire face of the bluff at that stretch with sand.
Mhm.
So this whole discussion has been kind of an interesting use of time.
Right. And that's consistent with other projects that the conservation has consistently approved, or it's a consistent condition of any permits that have been issued, that the commission has wanted native vegetation planted, and has, and that's usually American beach grass and then some non-invasive woody shrubs, and those are generally planted on a few inches of sand because beach grass can't grow in soil, it grows in sand, and it needs the base to set in. And then it sets its roots up to 15 feet deep. It's pretty impressive, but it has to start out in the sand.
I would agree.
Ashley, you had another question?
Oh, I just want a point of clarification. Charlie had asked, or you had said that the sand on the face of the bluff was approved by the Concom, but it was my understanding that part of the enforcement order against you guys was dumping sand on the face of the bluff in
Okay, so-
areas outside of your permitted
That is accurate. That there's, I guess you could break it down to 3 different kinds of, maybe 4 or 5 different kinds of sand that was delivered. There was sand that was used in the bags. There was sand that was used to create the benches where the bags sit on. There's sand that's in the template that goes on top, and then there's sand that would have gone on top of the bluff as part of the just delivery method. And then on top of that is what we would at this time call augmentation sand, which is used to protect from wind and rain and from the oversteepening. And at the time that was done, it was understood to be, by the people who were doing it, to be included within the permit, but that is not consistent with the understanding of the commission. The enforcement order includes that. We are not disputing it. We are working on it. If the whatever the Conservation Commission determines should be done for that sand that's there or for any sand in the future is how that will be handled. But if you look at the sand that essentially was delivered, and the augmentation sand was essentially delivered in 2 places, both of which are the delivery areas. But it is both higher and wider than would be necessary for just the delivery. So I'm not trying to say that it's, you know, only the delivery, but it's not as if they just went willy-nilly either. They sort of just went a little deeper and wider than the delivery area because it was providing such a great benefit at that site in numerous ways. But that doesn't mean that it should have, right.
Yeah?
I would really like to take issue with that because there's more than 2 delivery areas, and if you look at the whole bluff, there's many delivery areas. So I just think that is just not true. Thank you.
How many deliveries?
There are 2 delivery areas, and one of them is at 99 and 101 as designated as part of the emergency certification application, and the other was 87 Baxter Road. So I'm not contesting that.
No, I mean, it's more.
That's 91.
Yeah,
so
but it's several spots is what I'm saying. It's not just, and you're acting like it's just delivery. I think it's an intentional intention to cover up a lot of the bluff, and that's what the Concom is saying. So
Right.
pretending that it's just 2
No,
delivery.
I thought it was pretty clear that I'm not trying to pretend, or SBPF is not trying to pretend that it's just the 2 delivery areas. It is, I said, it was both deeper and wider than the minimum necessary to deliver to those areas. And
Go back to saying.
No. Bam. What I was saying was there's 2 delivery areas that were permitted and that were identified as part of the process, and that was 87 and 99 and 101. So any sand that was delivered outside of those areas, like 91, which you just showed us, and is well documented, is obviously what the enforcement order was about.
right, and that issue has been discussed and will be addressed with the Concom.
The other thing I'd like to say is, isn't it true that when you do it through a pipe, it's going to be much harder to get it to the beach?
It is, because you're going to have to manage the bottom of that pipe as you have volumes of sand come out of it. You're going to have to bring it up. So it will be a more
You have for, say, a diameter of something.
3 foot.
Yeah, it would have to be put in to get any out.
It'll be a more cumbersome process.
Yeah.
Mary?
I have a number of questions, but I think I'm just going to ask 2, maybe 3. First one is very easy, and maybe you know the answer. I would like to know what Cottage and Castle was paid by SBPF, I assume, for the project management of the installation from the granting of the order by the DEP to the completion of the initial phase of it, if you know, and I don't know whether, I know some of the cost information was included in the submission to the Conservation Commission, but do you have a
I don't
ballpark
see how
idea?
that's relevant.
Yeah, I think
it's
somewhat
certainly
inappropriate.
relevant, it's certainly relevant
Yeah.
to the issue of the cost of this type of installation. I recognize that the SBPF is bearing that cost now, but
I'll tell
we
you
have
what,
all, the
I'll
town
give
has
you-
been.
I'll give you one answer. Well below market value.
I'd like a dollar number.
But I think it's enough to say that they are definitely under the employ of SBPF, and there is a cost to SBPF for the construction management by Contra
But I
Costa.
think one of the issues is that the town, people in the town are very concerned that at some point in time, the costs of maintaining this structure, and as I understand it, SBPF wants to proliferate either this type of structure or other similar coastal erosion structures to a much larger extent. And should that project fall to the responsibility of the town and the people of the town, I think it would be very instructive and very important for the town people to have some preview of what kind of enterprise that would entail.
Well,
So
that-
you
that
certainly are
gets-
you're not obliged to answer my question, and if you choose not to, that's perfectly fine.
That gets
I'm
into-
happy to move
I
on.
think, what you're.
I'm happy to,
You're
I'm happy
mixing
to
is
move
the
on.
temporary proposal with a permanent proposal.
I'm
The-
happy to move on.
The temporary proposal is something that the town agreed to with the memorandum of understanding with SBPF, and SBPF is paying the full boat on that. There will be no taxpayer money for the maintenance of the structure that's in place right now.
Okay, that's
I-
not really related to my question, but I'd be happy to ask
I
my
think there is
next
a good,
question.
A good answer to that, because there's a legitimate concern underlying it. I think asking Jamie what he was paid is somewhat inappropriate, but I think whether or not the town taxpayers should be concerned that they might someday get saddled with a big bill that they should know all the details of, that's a legitimate concern. And I think that what's important to know is that the license agreement and the MOU both require SBPF to pick up all of those costs and other liabilities and other obligations, which I believe you're aware of. And secondly, that there is a process that's in place that's been discussed. Let me
Steve,
finish.
excuse me, I appreciate your,
Yeah.
I appreciate your expounding on this. That's not what the time is soon
Sure.
going. I would like to ask another question, if you don't mind. Thank you. There have been a number of discussions regarding what I'll call a dissonance between different town departments, what appears to be a dissonance between different town departments in terms of a temporary structure or a permanent solution to coastal erosion. And there were two that I remember quite vividly, and one is Kara very clearly saying that her department's position was that this project is intended to be temporary. And there was a question as to the moving forward on gaining access to either replace Baxter Road or to get access for the infrastructure for Baxter Road, and what was being done by other town departments to move that forward. And it seemed to me that the town departments seemed to be going in two different directions. That was my impression in listening and as a citizen. And there was another discussion at the Conservation Commission along the same lines, in which Carol also reiterated again the strength of her view that this was purely temporary, without adding on any other countervailing, concerns. So I guess my question, and maybe this can't be answered quickly, is what exactly is the position of the town departments, recognizing, of course, that the decisions and the direction of how the town is going to approach this is going to come, obviously, from a vote of the members of the Board of Selectmen. So
Well,
I just-
from the DPW standpoint and the stabilization of the toe of the slope, that's a temporary arrangement. Andrew's and his office is working incredibly diligently on trying to gain easements, and I can tell by the hair that he's losing, it's a long process and not going all that well. And so from his standpoint, it's going to be a long haul. And I think early on, when I had said that Sheep Pond Road took 7 years, and that was with a willing grantor of the easement, people said, oh, it can't possibly take that long. Well, I think Andrew will tell you it possibly can take that long. So while I'm saying temporary, I'm referring to the tow stabilization. And my personal opinion that at some point the town is going to have to bite the bullet and create an alternative access. When that happens, don't know when that's going to be.
You know,
And this is the process that I think Steve referred to before, where there were meetings of numbers of people to try to resolve these issues. And I guess my final question, and I asked this question before at a selectman meeting, is I still don't quite get the connection between the articles on calendar for town meeting that relate to Baxter Road and this process. And I am curious to know, can there be an explanation? Will that information be put forward in any other documents or any other
I
explanations going
think
to
the
be
last
given?
time I heard that those were going to be passed because there was not concurrence by the abutters.
Why don't I help answer that a little bit? The Board of Selectmen have somewhat the same question, and we will put on our agenda for next week a discussion of the Baxter Road articles on town meeting. I think we all need to approach town meeting with a better understanding, and whether we are gonna know before town meeting whether they should go forward or not. And I know the planning director is actively trying to answer that question and work with the Board of Selectmen on that. And we have an obligation, I believe, to inform town meeting, either at town meeting or beforehand, if we're able to, about what we would recommend on those articles. Now, Andrew, I hope that is close to where we are as a statement, okay?
I believe it is.
So that may not answer your question directly, but we recognize an obligation to
Okay.
share an approach
All right.
for town meeting.
Thank you. And I guess my final question with respect to that is, would it be anticipated that representatives of SBPS would oppose the passage of this? And I don't know whether
the
you.
warrant articles?
Yeah.
Well, I guess what I would say is I've seen the planning department on numerous occasions do an excellent job of explaining what are rather complicated articles at FinCom meetings and at Board of Selectmen meetings and at planning board meetings. So they have been publicly explained, a dozen times. But those articles were originally proposed way in advance of the current situation, and several of them are intended to be either placeholders or fail-safes, depending on what was happening. Not necessarily that they were the actual what was wanted, intended to happen. So I think as the process that's going on now develops, we'll see either something will be put forward that will be explained, or some or all of them will be pulled because they're not ripe. But because of the process involved for town meeting, you got to file before the notice deadline, or you don't have any other opportunity. So, but no one thought that was what was proposed was what we were going to end up with. We didn't know. But I would like to take a second to talk about the idea of temporariness, because I've heard it stated incorrectly a bunch of times, and I think that there's a big misunderstanding that's sort of perpetuating. So I'd like to clarify if you want it.
I guess my issue on temporariness is, I understand, I think I'm pretty clear that the position of SBPF is that they believe that that a permanent solution is needed, and God bless, that's fine. My concern is, what is the position of the town in terms of its responsibilities with respect to the infrastructure of Baxter Road and those concerns? And that's my interest, and that's the reason for the question. So, I
actually think
I don't really need further explanation of that. But I would like to say that I don't think you answered my question. Is it anticipated that SBPF would oppose the articles as currently formulated?
Well, some of those articles have somewhat nothing to do with SPPF, and some of them have everything to do with SPPF. And until we know whether there's a deal on the table or not, or what that deal looks like, we don't know if the current articles make sense or not. I can't tell you where we're going to be on the answer until I know all the pieces of the puzzle. And we're very close to knowing more of that, but we're not quite there yet. So I can't tell you that SPPF is going to oppose X number article when it might be that we support it, or it might be that SPPF doesn't take a position on it, or it might be that it's withdrawn because it's determined to be not ripe.
But SBPF is not opposed to the town getting easements for moving Baxter
Yeah,
Road.
yeah. I mean, all of the articles that are there.
Right, that would, I mean, if that kind of helps my question. If that is SBPF's position, that it is not opposed to the towns receiving these easements that are needed, that kind of answers the question.
It's working to help
Thank you.
deliver
And
them.
I don't want to
Yeah.
overstay.
Mary,
Thanks.
you might be okay on SBPF's position, but for the other members of the public, I want to be very clear on this temporariness issue.
I'm just going to sit down.
That's fine. The rock revetment was proposed as a permanent solution. The 1,500-foot geotube was proposed as a temporary solution until the permanent solution could be approved. The 900-foot geotubes was an emergency solution to sort of par down the 1,500-foot temporary solution to the minimum that could be approved. And it was also proposed as temporary, although emergency certifications really are only for 30 days. So the pending NOI, the pending notice of intent that will be heard next on April 2nd, is for a temporary installation. SBPF and the town both agree that that is what is being proposed. And by temporary, what we mean is that it would be approved for it's being proposed to be approved for a 3-year permit in which the Concom could grant up to 3 one-year extensions. And that has been stated publicly many times. But it is not anyone's assertion that it would be put in just until the road can be put in, and then it would be ripped out. That has never been stated as a goal of the town or SBPF, that we're just shoring up the toe long enough so that we could rip it out. It is being put in until either it fails, which we hope it doesn't, or until it is replaced by something else. Not just temporary as a way until there's no replacement of Baxter Road that makes erosion protection not necessary. Now, it might be that the Concom does not approve anything else, and if we get there, we get there, and that doesn't necessarily make the current thing permanent. It is only a 3 to 6 year. What's currently at the Concom is only a 3 to 6 year permit, and that is not in question. I hope that helps clarify the issue.
Hi, Lucy Dillon. How many trucks loads of sand have gone out to Baxter Road?
I do have somewhere that exact number, but it's roughly 2,000.
2,000, okay.
Just a little bit less than 2,000.
All right. As you know, there are a lot of wetlands on the other side of Baxter Road. I and my family were longtime property owners on Baxter Road. And over the years, especially within the last few, there have been properties that have sunk on the edge side. In particular,
Which one's the edge side?
the Corn Gold is one that has
the
significantly,
seaward side,
that has
okay.
probably gone about 2 feet in the last few years. My question is someone monitoring the damage, possible damage, that these heavy truckloads are doing to the bluff, especially with the conditions on the wetlands and everything else on the other side of the road?
Sure. So we are absolutely monitoring the impacts that we're having along the roadways. And
But is someone measuring I believe Josh Posner's property is also sunk in the last number of years. I don't know if Josh would admit to that, but it certainly seemed visible starting about 5 years ago. Or maybe even a little bit more than that when he pulled back his house.
I've never heard of this is the first I've heard about land on the seaward side of the road sinking. But in regards to the impacts of the truck traffic, we have been trying to pay close attention to that. As we've noticed issues, we've been in touch with Kara. We've identified them as they've happened, and we're going to work together as part of the spring maintenance and patchwork that's going to go on out there to deal with a few small spots that we know are related to the truck traffic. And then along the sides of the roads on Baxter Road, where we had to get off of the roadway, we'll obviously grade that out. We'll hydro seed that area and try and make it like it was before we got underway.
Well, being after 6 o'clock, we've kind of gone through our hour.
You have. Can I, just because there's something been on my mind for a while, I'd like to ask one more question, and if you'll indulge me.
I can't refuse.
I understand. So I'm being a little inserting here, so I admit to that. But one of the things, and Kara may remember this, I asked early on, hard armoring, I think it's well known that beaches erode up to the hard armoring structures. And I think the town, as a participant, owes it to the citizens to explain how this will end up at some point in the future. We don't know because the beach is eroding 3.5 feet a year on average, but it's episodic. But at some point, I assume the town expects that beach will erode up to either geotubes or rocks or whatever happens to be there. And I think you could ask your engineers or your coastal geologists to draw like a transect and show us where you expect the beach to look like when it reaches that point. Because my expectation of the pictures we've seen from SBPF of other sites, that's what happens. And I think you need to describe that for the public. Thank you.
You know, Mr. Atherton, I think a good example of what happens when you have a rock revetment is if you go down Eel Point Road a bit, down on East Tristram's Avenue, there's 2 rock revetments down there. And, you know, those have been there 30 years, maybe 40 years, since the 70s. And what you see is that in the summer, there's a pretty good beach, and in the winter, there's a much narrower beach, and at some points, there's no beach. And when you have hard armoring, it generally, you know, and I'm not an engineer, but this is my understanding, you generally will have a narrowing of the beach, and especially during the winter, it's always just naturally lower and narrower than in the summer. The major difference, and what SBPF is proposing that should act as a substantial, if not total mitigation, is the contribution of a tremendous amount of sand. And the difference between this project and other projects is that there just are not projects of this scale that have this amount of sand contribution. Our calculation of the sand lost through the bluff is 14.3 cubic yards per linear foot, and the proposed contribution is 22 cubic yards per linear foot. That should have a substantial impact on both the protection and provision of the beach in front and also the protection from mitigation of down-dipped sand starvation. I don't think anybody can accurately predict what's going to happen in 200 years, but you know, this project should have a much better situation in terms of preserving the beach than other projects that just don't have any sand at all, which is what most projects have. And if you look at, you know, historically, I think there's something like 16,000 revetments in Massachusetts, and we've looked at a number of them. Most of them have a beach at some point and don't at other points, but almost none of them have sand mitigation.
I would elaborate on that just a little bit too, because I mean, you look at the case studies that have been brought forward in a lot of the permitting process, and none of them have nourishment as part of it. It's just not really done as a part of a hard armoring. But at 79 Baxter Road, where there's a terracing system in place, and it's been in place for I think about 8 years. In that scenario, we analyzed the sand contribution, and it averaged out at about 4.5 cubic yards per year. And so 8 years isn't really a long period of time when you're talking about an erosion control structure. But the beach has been pretty well maintained in that scenario, and that's, you know, about 20% of the sand that we're talking about. So.
Can I ask you a question about that, about the sand? So that brings me, I'm wondering then, well, you bring up 79, you're talking about Twin Chimney, right? And the point is, he's dumped all that dirt down there, and he's done all that, but he's had to move his house. And he's probably going to have to move it before too long to the other side. So it's not stopping moving the houses.
Yeah.
But how much sand, where are you going to get all this sand? Are we going to dig up Nantucket and throw it over the bluff?
Well-
And just wash out to sea and have an enormous hole out in the middle? Where are you going to get all this sand? And another question on the beach preservation that you bring up. Why do you call yourself Siasconset Beach Preservation Fund? Why not Baxter Road Preservation Fund? That's a silly
Right.
point, but anyway,
No,
I am serious about the sand point.
Yeah, there's two sides to that question, and I want to defer half of it to Jamie. But first of all, SBPF is 20 years old, so it predates certainly my involvement as their lawyer.
I was just kind of kidding on that.
But the point about 87 in terms of it having 79 in terms of it losing all that sand and all that land and needing to move back. The reason why it lost all that land is that the biodegradable material that's there is not substantial enough to stand up to storms, and you end up with toe erosion during the worst possible time, and the storm and that toe erosion causes sloughing, where you lose, I think at that property they lost 30 feet in 1 year. And we anticipate is the entire point of the geotubes is to avoid that situation where you have a stabilized toe that you wouldn't lose that amount. So you know, the idea that you're going to lose that amount anyway, we're hoping is not what's the case.
But he's had jute bags there, and we have never seen any substantial slumping of the bluff at Helmut's property. And we've been photographing it for 5 years. We've never seen, in all that time that he's had the jute back there, substantial slumping. What we have seen, though, is the edge degrade.
Yeah. What happened was this past year was was a time where the bag broke open. It was not, which is designed to do, and then there was, before it could be filled in, the toe was undermined, and there was a loss of almost 30 feet at that one point.
Doesn't that say, really? I mean, really, this is. And then you're talking about, the other thing is, she mentioned that you're having trouble getting easements, and I just really don't understand why you're not working more to get away from the edge of the bluff, instead of trying to bolster up this project. It's not like what you're talking about on Eel Point Road. This is a substantially different structure. It's eroding seriously from the top. It's not just eroding from the toe of the bluff. The toe is not the only issue here.
Right. No, that's right. And we hope that the Concom will give us a permit to help protect the face of the bluff with potentially sand augmentation, but especially with just plantings.
Well, awesome, but we've also photographed all the places from Posner's house south that have put grass up. And we have great photographs of all that grass dropping off the bluff.
When the toe undermines, that's exactly what happens.
With geotubes underneath them. They're all got geotubes.
No.
They're sitting there. They've had constant geotubes for years.
Jute tubes.
Not geotubes, excuse me, jute bags.
Yeah.
They've had constant jute bags under them for years. They go out there and they put that stuff on there, and a little bit later, it's all falling down.
Yeah.
It's too steep.
I think if you
can't
look,
put grass on a vertical surface. You don't see grass on the Grand Canyon. It's rock. It's dirt.
right. I think if you look south down the bluff where there's still dunes in front, where the toe is not undermined, you'll see an excellent example of where the native vegetation is holding the bluff together.
There's more of a slant. There's more
Well,
of a slant there.
in some places it is, in some places it's near
But
vertical.
where as the bluff steepens, the further north you get, and as the bluff steepens, when they put grass on it, it all falls down.
Yeah. If you do just grass, it's not going to hold. It's going to require woody shrubs and other native plants as part of the final plan.
Well, I'm going to start a big fund, a pool or something, and take bets on how long your grass stays on the side of the bluff. I think I'm going to win.
Thank you all for coming tonight.
You know, when we set this up, we agreed on just an hour, and we've got an hour and a half. So on behalf of everyone here, we'd really like to thank you. I just have one point of clarification, because many of us are concerned about that beach, and nowhere in any of the hearings has any of this sand mitigation been represented to maintain a dry beach in front of those geotubes? The amount of mitigation is to replicate the amount of sand that would go into the littoral system. Les Smith himself has testified before the Concom that before a hard structure, be it geotubes or rock revetment, that the beach will narrow and eventually disappear. So I think that's a point of clarification, and I think we have to all understand that. So I thank you all for coming. Thank you.
Thank you. Pam? Pam, you watch yourself out there. We don't need you falling over. I don't need you falling over.
As long as I don't drive.
I'm not worried about.
I almost did that once.
Yeah.
I was talking on the front wheels of the truck were all.
Yeah. Last thing we need is you photographing your own self falling over.
Well, it's not that steep. Thank you.
Okay, so what I usually do is scan it to you. So you all need to do that, but scan it to HR.